Everyone. Welcome everyone to this very important lecture by Rabbi Jacobson. It's focused on rising anti-Semitism and raising children during these times. The event is sponsored by the Mazel Parent Association in honor of International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th. As a parent of two Mazel students and the grandson of Holocaust survivors, this topic is very personal to me. Anti-Semitic incidents are up significantly. We live in perilous times. There's a tension between the censorship of unwelcome speech versus free speech ideals, where and who draw the lines, the distrust of history, authority, conspiracy, fake news, anti-Zionism, Holocaust denial, all play into this. For parents, it's challenging to raise strong, confident, and proud Jewish children in the face of the rising wave of anti-Semitism at all levels. Couple of questions. Do we attempt to shield young children as best we can or provide strategies for how best to navigate the problems they encounter? And second, how do we reconcile the tension between the opportunities that Jews have in the United States in 2023 versus this unnerving increase in negative attitudes towards and actions against Jews? Our parents, the kids' grandparents, come from different backgrounds and have their own experiences with anti-Semitism. Some are children of Holocaust survivors, some grew up in the former Soviet Union. Their insights into how to deal with anti-Semitism are very helpful, but the conversations can often be difficult. As the grandson of Holocaust survivors, I've always been aware of what my grandparents endured. The Holocaust had downstream effects on many generations. My grandparents had declined to be interviewed by a Steven Spielberg documentary, but they felt comfortable talking to me about their experiences. I record our conversations and publish their accounts in my book, From Poland to Brooklyn. The book details their horrific experience in Poland during the war, the subsequent moves to Germany, and then building a life in the United States. They had three children, 7 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. Judaism and tzedakah were central to their lives. Their account is one where good triumphed over evil. They instilled Jewish values in their family. My mom once pointed out that if a stranger were to have met my grandparents for the first time, he would not suspect that they were Holocaust survivors. They were an example of the American dream, even though they experienced such loss, hatred, and hard times. And that begs the question, how do we foster resilient Jewish identities in our children in the face of growing anti-Semitism? The short answer, education and empowerment. And for that, this lecture is focused on this topic, and we turn to Rabbi Jacobson. Just a brief biography. He's one of America's premier Jewish scholars in Torah and Jewish mysticism. He's been a teacher and mentor to thousands across the world. He's a very successful, passionate, and mesmerizing communicator of Jewish ideas. He was born in Brooklyn in 1972. He grew up at the feet of the Lubavitcher Rabbi. He's the author of A Tale of Two Souls and written more than 1,000 articles on diverse Jewish themes. He's traveled to hundreds of communities across the world, educating and inspiring people of various Jewish backgrounds. He was the first rabbi ever to be invited by the Pentagon to deliver the religious keynote to the US military chief of chaplains and to the NSA. He serves as the dean of yeshiva.net and teaches one of the largest Torah classes in the world virtually. Editor-in-chief of the Algemeiner Journal, spiritual leader of Congregation Beis Shmuel. We look forward to hearing Rabbi Jacobson's thoughts and take questions on all of this. And it should be an excellent, very important evening. Thanks. And Achani and Sonia, I don't know if the rabbi is, or he'll be on shortly. Okay. Okay. while we wait, I think, we can kind of all reflect on, what's going on in the world today, just in terms of anti-Semitism at different levels. I think that our children are not immune to social media, and think about Kanye West and anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Think about college campuses. I think I personally think back to my own experiences at college, where there were certainly times where I felt it was sort of safest to keep your head down, maybe not advertise that you're Jewish, but I certainly didn't fear, showing support for Israel. I didn't fear, attending the Israeli Day parade or something like that. Something that I wouldn't hide if I were to attend or something like that. Today, I think it is more challenging, and I think really the primary reason for this lecture is to try to get some strategies for how to deal with all of this. And I mentioned in the opening that the tension between acknowledging the opportunities that we have, as Jews. I think I'm an attorney, and I know for a fact that the law firm that I worked at for 6 years prior to my current job did not hire Jews in the 1970s. So now it's full of Jews. I think that, on the one hand, we should be thankful that as Jews who have struggled and or gone through different challenges throughout the centuries, the United States does afford us unique opportunities, and that should be appreciated. And how do you, sort of reconcile that tension with, clearly the rise in dangerous attitudes that I think we all experience at some level or another. And where do we go from here? Is there, is there hope for the future? Is this sort of the peak of sort of the bad times, or, as this history show us that sort of this is the starting point once you start censoring speech, and or questioning the idea of whether folks should be able to speak? How does that turn out for the Jews? I think the idea is that, on the one hand, perhaps many of us are happy that someone like Kanye West is sort of essentially being erased in many arenas of life. On the other hand, who is making these decisions, and what if they ever turn against the Jews or turn against Israel, right? What if the question becomes, okay, sure, you can be free to be Jewish, and society will basically leave you alone, but you should, give up your allegiance to Israel. I think that, that certainly wouldn't be a shocking outcome of sort of recent fallout, right? That the idea that, is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and that the fact that that is an ongoing debate, you can imagine the tide turning to the extent that perhaps, association with Israel puts us in a different category versus those Jews who disassociate, right? So that's sort of a unique modern danger that perhaps we face. Is the answer censoring speech? And again, who are the folks who choose how to do that? Should we as Jews be happy that, anti-Semitic ideas perhaps are, I guess, removed from social media platforms? Or are we confident in the marketplace of ideas that the best ideas will win out, that there are more sort of good people than bad people? And, how does this all turn out? So I think these are important questions. I don't think there's easy answers to any of them. And I think that as parents, we have an obligation to kind of not just see this through, but develop strategies for how to best to move forward. I see Rabbi Jacobson has joined. So I'll turn it over to you, Rabbi.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Just tell me, Stephen, you can hear me and see me?
Absolutely, yep, perfect.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much. I'm just making the light a little better here. Okay. For those who are wondering, I didn't finish all the books in the background, but they're real books. They're not fake, not a backdrop. These are real svarim, real books of Torah. And I'm still in the middle of trying to learn them. Okay, my dearest friends, it is a pleasure to be with all of you at Mazal. And I really want to thank you for this tremendous opportunity and for the thrilling privilege to be able to be here with all of you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Mrs. Okanov. Thank you to the entire leadership of the school. Thank you to the parent body. Thank you to all of the community that is gracing us here this evening. It means a lot that we are all here together. And I know that the topic, anti-Semitism, and how we deal with it and how we understand it, is something that is on all of our minds, and for very good reason, because of the unique situation and times in which we live in. On one hand, it's a time of paradox. On one hand, there's so much prosperity, opportunity, growth. Jewish life in Israel, in America, and in so many parts of the world is flourishing. And on the other hand, we're all plagued and bothered by the maladies of Jew hatred that we encounter day in and day out. Jew hatred rearing its ugly head on campuses, in universities, places where freedom should be encouraged, where people and youngsters ought to feel safe and secure, that they're allowed to be who they are. They can be loyal to their family, to their heritage, to their tradition, to their faith, to their people. And yet they often encounter bigotry, hatred on the pages of newspapers that are apparently progressive and liberal and all-embracing and pluralistic. And there too, the toxicity of anti-Semitism has infiltrated in politics. Today, politicians don't even have to be ashamed to say despicable, nasty, disgusting things about the Jewish people, about their double loyalties, about Israel. Not just a disagreement with certain policies or ideas or laws of Israel, which is legitimate. Jews themselves disagree about Israel all the time. But the delegitimization of the Jewish people with such venom and hatred is really shocking to all of us. Now, I know that this is a week with extra focus on the Holocaust because of Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th. And I know that this school, the Mazal Jewish Day School, has dedicated its energy and its resources to be able to instill in all of its children, those that come from Russian background, and those other Israeli, and those who are American families, a wide spectrum of Jewish children from different levels of affiliations and observances. But the Mazal Day School tries to inculcate in all of them a sense of pride, a sense of dignity, a sense of belonging. And here, they and we are often so dumbfounded. So I want to address, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to stay to the point because I want to really cover at least the basics, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We want to discuss a few things. First of all, history of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism in the Holocaust, the current growing anti-Semitism in the present climate and environment, education, how to explain anti-Semitism to our children, younger children, older children. How do we even explain the universal and deep hatred of the Jewish people? What causes it? How do we explain the fact that tyrants empires, governments of every age have desired and plotted persecution or death for the Jewish people. We're such a small minority. Why do we trigger such hatred? Finally, I want to empower. We want to empower. We don't want to be, we're Jews. So we never just focus on the negative. We always focus on the positive. That's why we're still here today. We want to empower. We want practical steps to foster resilience in our children, in our families, among our communities, foster stronger Jewish identity and deeper Jewish pride and dignity. And last but not least, we want to lay the groundwork for our children to understand and handle these difficult situations, which they may encounter just about anywhere at any point of their life. So this is going to be my address now, briefly, and then we're going to go to the question and answer session. Everybody could bring up any question you would like. So let me jump right into it. Understanding somewhat of the history of anti-Semitism, the culture of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism today. So actually 2 weeks ago, a very, very special person died. His name was Paul Johnson. I don't know if you ever read the book, The History of the Jews. It's a very, very special book. I would say it's an amazing book because it wasn't written by a Jew. It was written by somebody who's not Jewish. Paul Johnson was a Gentile. He was a Christian, and he died 2 weeks ago at the age of 94. He was a prolific journalist, anthologist, speechwriter, very popular historian, and he wrote one of the best books on the Jews, at least from my perspective. It's called History of the Jews. And even though he wasn't Jewish, he had such a keen understanding, I can't say thorough, I'm not going to tell you I agree with everything in the book, but he had a very keen understanding about a lot of things about the Jews. One of the best parts of the book is the epilogue. Paul Johnson asks the question, what would have happened had Abraham simply stayed in Ur? Ur is the city, the country or the city in southern Turkey, northern Iraq, where Abraham was born. What if he would have stayed there and he would have not moved towards the creation of a new people and ultimately a new religious culture? Paul Johnson answers, and I quote, certainly the world without the Jews would have been a radically different place. Humanity might have eventually stumbled upon all of the Jewish insights, but we can't be sure. All the great conceptual discoveries of the intellect seem obvious and inescapable once they have been revealed, but it requires a special genius to formulate them for the first time. Paul Johnson says, the Jews believe themselves to have been created and commanded to be a light unto the Gentiles, unto the nations, and they have obeyed to the best of their considerable powers. The results, whether considered in religious or secular terms, have been remarkable. The Jews gave to the world ethical monotheism, which might be described as the application of reason to divinity. In a more secular age, they applied the principles of rationality to the whole range of human activities, often in advance of the rest of mankind. The light they shed disturbed as well as it illuminated, for it revealed painful truths about the human spirit, as well as the means to uplift it. The Jews have been great truth tellers, and that is one reason they have been hated so deeply. And whenever I think of anti-Semitism, this paragraph comes back to me. Despite people not liking to hear this truth, we all know and we all feel that anti-Semitism is not just another form of bigotry in the history of humanity. People have scapegoats, people blame this one and that one, and they also blame Jews. We know there's something unique about the Jews which triggers it. There's something unique about the Jews that inspired the most cultured nation on earth to create gas chambers for 1.5 million children. There's something unique about the Jews or Judaism, which triggered every massive empire in the last 3,500 years to target Jews for annihilation or persecution. Something unique about the Jews that caused that you can almost count on one hand the countries from which the Jewish people were not expelled over the last few thousand years. Something unique about the Jews that anti-Semitism has flourished even in countries where Jews did not live, even in countries and among societies who did not know the Jewish people. Something unique about the Jews, that no matter the circumstances, we've always been blamed. We've been blamed for being too poor and too rich, too secular and too religious, too capitalistic, too socialist, too egalitarian, too parochial, too universal, too liberal, too conservative. We kept too much to ourselves. We tried to integrate too much with others. Every factor became another reason for anti-Semitism. How did this happen? What is it? What is it? And this question haunts every Jew, and it haunts every serious thinker. There was a famous thinker, his name was George Steiner. George Steiner was a literary critic. He was a professor of comparative literature at Oxford University, at Cambridge University. He was an original intellectual in the contemporary cultural landscape. And he once said, you'll forgive me, he said, Steiner once said, the role of the Jew is, here goes, to be a royal pain. He said, he expressed it one way, I'll use different words, to be a royal pain in the conscience of the world. The Jews invented monotheism, the idea of a single God who had ethical standards and who was demanding and who held you responsible for your actions and behaviors, and felt that there's moral standards and there are limits to power. And the most important thing is how we behave towards our fellow human being, and that we're all connected and responsible for each other. And in that sense, the Jewish people became the moral irritant and insomniac among people, as Steiner puts it, but really an honor beyond honors. The Jew represents the uncompromising demand for universal truth, universal morality, universal compassion, universal goodness, universal peace, universal oneness. Hashem Echad, God is one, means we're all one. It's an intoxicating idea that human beings can overcome their selfish impulses, but this came with a price. And the price is Jew hatred and Judaism hatred. The Talmud has a beautiful pun. The word Sinai, Mount Sinai, the place and the moment of revelation, led to Sina, which means hatred. The word Sinai is associated with the Hebrew word Sina, which means loathing, hatred. Jew hatred, therefore, is an exalted version of kill the empire. It's the urge to silence the alarm clock. Nobody likes their alarm clock when it rings. Nobody likes wake-up call. I want to sleep. And the Jewish people have been the universal alarm clock since Abraham. Nobody likes an alarm clock. In 1996, I visited Dublin, Ireland. There was a congregation there that substituted a violin for the blast of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Instead of blowing the ram's horn, they put in a violin. I asked the spiritual leader of the congregation why. And she told me that the notes of the violin were more melodic, more melodic, more beautiful, more aesthetic, and more attractive. The shofar, she told me, gave me migraine headaches. She missed the point. It's necessary that the blasts of the shofar be as discordant as they are, because the great truths are essentially discordant. The great truths disturb us. They trigger us. They're not meant to put us to sleep. They're meant to wake us up from our sleep. That's why there's not one story in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible that ends off in a way that you feel comfortable. Not one story culminates with a certain sense of closure and peacefulness. So now we can all go to sleep, because the stories of the Torah were not made to let you sleep. They were made to wake you up from your sleep, to challenge you, to stimulate you, to trigger you, to make you ask deeper questions, to ask you to be more reflective, more introspective, to go deeper into yourself, to face up to your own skeletons and demons and ghosts, to ask tough questions from myself, to be able to face my brokenness and find out what is the inner operating system upon which my life is functioning. So Paul Johnson understood the power of Judaism. And as he puts it, and I quote again, the Jews were not just innovators. They were also exemplars and epitomizers of the human condition. They seemed to present all the inescapable dilemmas of a person in a heightened and clarified form. They somehow captured all the struggles of humanity within their own culture. They were the quintessential strangers and sojourners, the word that Abraham uses to describe himself. But are we not all such on this planet, of which we each possess a mere leasehold of 70? The Jews were the emblem of homeless and vulnerable humanity. But is not the whole earth no more than a temporary transit camp? The Jews were fierce idealists striving for perfection, and at the same time, fragile men and women yearning for flesh pots and safety. They wanted to obey God's difficult law, but they wanted to admiration, love, and enmity, often mischievously and mysteriously mixed together. These are powerful ideas. I don't know if they sum it all up, but it's powerful ideas. What Jews always understood is that anti-Semitism has nothing to do with one detail or another detail, with a Jew making a mistake here or making a mistake there. There is something about the Jewish people historically that have aroused incredible, powerful emotions. And when we see who hates us, we could be proud of ourselves, because always take a look at the countries and societies that hate Jews, and you will see that countries where Jews are hated are countries who are abusive to their own people, countries who deny human rights from their own minorities, countries who have created despots who have been cruel to their own people. Show me who your enemy is, and I'll tell you who you are. When you looked at who is the enemy of the Jewish people, who were the enemies, who are the enemies till today, you're like, wow, if Stalin hates your guts and Hitler hates your guts, if Bin Laden hates your guts and Nasrallah and Rouhani and Ahmadinejad, if these are the people, the Arafats of the world who loathe you, that's a compliment. That means you're doing something right when evil despises you. There's something very good and holy about the Jews and Judaism that people feel consciously or unconsciously. And it's no difference if you're religious or secular, because a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Hitler hated the most secular Jew as he hated the most religious Jew. He wanted every Jewish child dead because he felt the holiness, the goodness embedded in every Jewish soul, and evil is allergic to goodness and wants it exterminated. What each one of our children needs to understand about anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is not because we're doing something wrong, because we have been the worst people on earth, because we're greedy, because we're a bunch of Shylocks, because we're a bunch of moneylenders, because we like sushi, because we like golf, because we're greedy, because we like money. You and I know Jews have flaws like every other people. But the goodness the Jewish people have given the world is unparalleled, from Nobel Prizes to every other area of humanity in which we have contributed spiritually and morally and scientifically and medically and economically and psychologically and in the world of literature and the world of peace. Anti-Semitism is embedded in people who are not ready to face their own inner darkness, their own inner evil. And the Jewish people trigger them in incredible ways. And therefore, what must be our response? Number one, never be ashamed with who you are. And never allow your children to be ashamed with who they are. Number one. On the contrary, when you see such anti-Semitism, be more Jewish. Number two, we can't fight anti-Semitism on our own. We need all good people. We need to explain to the world that a society that has no place for Jews has no place for humanity. A society that can't respect diversity, a society that can't create a comfort space, a comfort zone for the Jewish people, is ultimately a society that is decomposing and disintegrating. It's going to become rotten to its core, and it's going to abuse its own people. Hitler began with the Jews. He didn't end with the Jews. He murdered millions of his own. Stalin began with the Jews, but he didn't end with the Jews. He murdered 50 million or 40 million of his own people. 9/11 did not begin with the Twin Towers, with the World Trade Center. 9/11 began with suicide bombers in Israel. Suicide bombers who went from pizza shop to synagogues to basketball fields to buses all across Israel to blow children and women and men to pieces and murder themselves in the process. And the world said, it's an Israeli problem. It's Israelis' issues with the Palestinians. And then suddenly, 9/11 and Madrid and Mumbai and Russia and London. Oops, sorry. And it's minorities. So we have to turn to the world and say anti-Semitism is not our fight alone. It's all of our concern, because the world will go down the drain, go down to the tubes. Another important issue. We are not the ones who could stop anti-Semitism. Anti-Semites are the ones who stop anti-Semitism. We're not the ones who created it. We're not the ones who can eliminate it. It's anti-Semites who are guilty for anti-Semitism. It's not Jews. If I change my nose, or I change my glasses, or I change my forehead, or I change my suit, if I take off my beard, if I put on my beard, it's not changing anything. We have to realize this. Jews sometimes bend over backwards and backwards and backwards. They're embarrassed with being Jews to appease anti-Semites. They are the ones who created, they are the ones who have to stop it. It's an illness, it's a disease, it's a moral disease. Our job is to be strong, firm, not to be embarrassed, and not to appease. Churchill said, appeasement is feeding the crocodile with the hope that he's going to eat you last. That's what appeasement is. We must realize our job is not to intoxicate the anti-Semites, not to do something that will feed it, especially this is true in Israel. The great mistake that Israelis leaders have made over the past half century is that they thought that appeasement will stop the terror. It intoxicated the terrorists, and it made it much worse. And there's another important message about anti-Semitism. And that is Jews have to stand up and they have to get their friends to stand up. When somebody sees anti-Semitism, hears anti-Semitism, Jews have to yield every influence that they have. And instead of being embarrassed and trying to be nice and trying to be everybody's friend, we need to call a spade and call ugliness, ugliness, and not be silent. And mobilize every good human being to protest it and stand up. And there's another element, that is education. America and children all over the world need to be educated about morality, about hatred. They need to be educated what it means to be a good person. Education of values, of character, is what creates a society of people who don't hate somebody just because he or she comes from a different nation, a different people, a different tribe, a different culture, and a different race. Friends, there's something else we have to understand about anti-Semitism. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory used to say this: anti-Semitism is like a virus. You know how viruses work? Viruses attack the body, but the body develops antibodies to fight back. So the viruses go through mutations, and through the mutations, they infiltrate into the body. They reproduce the cells, as with coronavirus and any other virus, and they take over the organism. That's exactly how anti-Semitism works. Anti-Semitism is a virus. It attacks, and the way it attacks is, it identifies the most vulnerable argument in society at the time, blaming the Jews of doing that which society sees is the worst evil. And then it mutates every few years, every few decades. It goes through a mutation so that when the previous virus already has developed, we have developed antibodies, the mutation manages to infiltrate again. So for example, there was a time when anti-Semitism was about the fact that Jewish people killed the founder of Christianity. There was a time when anti-Semitism was about the fact that the Jewish people would not accept Christianity, would not accept Islam, were poisoning wells, were using Christian blood for matzah, etc., etc. There was a time when anti-Semitism went through a mutation, when religion and Christianity wasn't so popular and relevant. The issue became the Jews are undermining the nationalistic identities of the nations where they live. The word anti-Semitism was coined in the 1800s by a German writer who basically claimed that it wasn't about religion, it was about race. That created a new anti-Semitism, because if you hate me because of my religion, I could convert. But if you hate me because of my biology, there's nothing I can do. So suddenly in the 1800s, it was irrelevant if Jews are religious or not. They're Semites, anti-Semites, no difference if they're atheists or not. And so in every generation, anti-Semitism goes through different mutations. Take a look at now. Today, anti-Semitism went through a new mutation. And what argument is it using against Israel? That Israel is abusing human rights, that Israel is involved in ethnic cleansing, that Israel is involved in the murder of innocent women and children, that Israel is an apartheid state. You see these sensitivities of a culture, anti-Semitism captures them and blames the Jews for them. Anti-Semitism claims that every Jew is a Zionist and every Jewish institution is pro-Israel, and therefore every Jew is entitled to be attacked. These are the lies that anti-Semitism, like a virus, goes through a mutation and then captures the world imagination. And every time there's a new mutation, and that's how the anti-Semitism gets in. And our job is to speak the truth, never to surrender, never to appease, never to be silent, never to duck, and never ever to internalize the hatred and become self-hating people. We must never allow our people to be divisive and to be fragmented, to be scattered. We must be united as one, even if we disagree. But we have each other and we must be united. If you ever go to San Francisco and you visit the redwoods, the sequoia trees, you have the oldest trees on earth. trees that are 3,000, 3,500, maybe 4,000 years old. They're called sequoias. And scientists a number of years ago were studying what's the secret of the longevity of these trees. How do they weather every storm? How do they survive so long? They thought that the roots probably go very deep. They were shocked to see that the roots are very shallow, 4 or 5 feet. So how do these trees survive? And then they realized what the trees lack in depth, they make up in breadth. When a sequoia tree starts developing roots and the roots begin stretching and expanding, when these roots encounter the roots of another sequoia tree, they become interlocked with each other. Sometimes you can have 50 sequoias underground. They are all interconnected and interlocked because the roots become entangled with each other. And then they realized above the surface, they seem like 50 different trees. Under the earth, they're all one. Therefore, nobody can destroy them. We are the sequoias of nature. We are the redwoods of nature. How did the Jewish people survive 3,000-4,000 years in the face of such anti-Semitism? The answer is above the surface, we're different, we're separate. Subterranean, on a subterranean level, we're all one. We are interlocked and What did we have that the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Romans and the Byzantines, what did we have that they didn't have? They had larger empires and larger militaries and larger countries and skilled soldiers and language and culture. What did we have that they didn't have? The answer is we had and we have Torah and Mitzvahs. We have Yiddishkeit. We have Judaism. They're not here. We're here. There's something about Judaism that has kept the Jewish people going. It's the one thing we had from the moment we left Egypt and we stood at Mount Sinai. Through thick and thin, in every place and in every location, in every milieu and in every journey, in every climate and under all circumstances, in good days and bad days, in exhilarating days and devastating days. We always had the study of Torah and the celebration of mitzvahs that mothers and fathers bequeath to their children day in and day out. And when you look objectively at Jewish history, you have to come to the conclusion and say there is some mystical, transcendent, divine power in this that has kept the Jewish people not only surviving, but thriving. And thus, if today we want to make sure that our children grow up with uplifted heads and uplifted postures, with a sense of pride and dignity, we need to remember all of these messages. And we need to remember to inculcate within them an understanding of who they are, what people they come from, what are the values of the Jewish people. Don't teach your children that what makes them Jewish is that so many people hate them. Teach them that what makes them Jewish is that God loves them. Sometimes we make the mistake and we create Jewish identity based on hatred, on the Holocaust. Because Hitler wanted to kill us, and this one wanted to kill us, and this one wanted to kill us. This is who we are. And then they say, I don't want to be part of a hated people. I want to be part of a free, relaxed, chilled out people. Leave me alone. Our children need to understand the positivity, the celebration of Jewish life. We say every morning, how fortunate is our lives, how pleasant is our fate, how beautiful is our inheritance. I want my children to understand that what makes them Jewish is not Hitler and Stalin, not the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. What makes them Jewish is Abraham and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan, and Rashi and Maimonides, the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal. That's what I want them to know makes them Jewish. I want them to understand the gifts of being Jewish, what the Jewish people have given the world and have given us and have given the planet. I want them to understand Judaism from within, to appreciate the gift of morality, the gift of Shabbos, the gift of charity, the gift of education, the gift of morality, the gift of consciousness, the gift of awareness, the gift of prayer, the gift of philanthropy, the gift of sensitivity, the gift of compassion, of kindness, of freedom, of history. These are ideas that the Jewish people have introduced into the vocabulary of humanity. There's a beautiful book by an Irish author. It's called The Gifts of the Jews. His name is Dr. Cahill, a special book. Take a look at, brilliant book. He shows how all the most powerful gifts of humanity were introduced by the Jewish people. This is what we want to give our children. And this is critical that we give this to our children. And I must conclude, and then we'll open the floor to questions. We live in a climate where many Jews are apologetic. They feel apologetic for Israel. They feel apologetic for Jews defending themselves. They're always blaming us for the anti-Semitism. We did this and we did that. Yes, we should be honest about our mistakes. And it's very good to be reflective. And if we make mistakes, we should confess them and say, I'm sorry. But never be apologetic about your existence. And never be apologetic about the fact that you're entitled to a homeland. There are 22 Muslim countries around Israel. There's only one Jewish state. Are Jews not entitled even to one Jewish state? Don't be apologetic about that. And don't be apologetic about the rights of the Jewish people to defend themselves and to defend their children. And when the media is always blaming Israel, Israel, the Hamasniks in Gaza have shot around 20,000 rockets on a civilian country on civilians, not on armies. And Israel is supposed to be quiet and say, come kill all of our children. Why don't you wipe out all of our schools? Just kill them. Then you're going to like the Jews. I don't want dead Jews. I want live Jews, and Jews should stop being apologetic and being embarrassed and always apologizing for their existence. Jews have to be proud and normal and upright and realize, don't preach to us about human sensitivity. Our Torah is the first document that spoke about morality. We are the ones who introduced the concept that God created every person in his image, that every human life is sacred and holy, and its value is absolute and non-negotiable. Don't come to preach to the Jewish people about the value of life. We shouldn't kill children. We are the ones who introduced and taught the world what we heard from God about the sacredness of every single human life, Jew and Gentile alike. Do we make mistakes? We make mistakes. But this chutzpah, arrogance, to accuse the Jewish people and Israel in using Nazi methods. What a disgrace when Jews, instead of speaking out against the lies and the myths, we apologize for ourselves. Don't do that. And don't teach your children to do that. We need to mobilize our friends. We need to mobilize ourselves. We need to be united. We have to remember what Judaism is. We have to inculcate that in our children. And we need to be able to strengthen our Yiddishkeit and our relationship with God. Know that Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Should I start reading the questions?
That was excellent. I had one comment before the questions. Just on one of the last points you made, I was thinking about, in the early 90s, I remember Alan Dershowitz had wrote about this. He had said, at that time, anti-Semitism was sort of, on the decline. It was sort of waning, and it was a great thing. It wasn't gone, of course, but one of the concerns that he had was that Jewish identity was disappearing because Jews didn't have nothing sufficient to bind them together, right? Anti-Semitism, often as evil as it is and horrible as it is, it bound Jews to fight against something. And I think you alluded to that, one of the last points you made. And I think that, I guess it's education that we need, right? Because what makes Jews special? What
Very, very, very good and salient and very important point. And, unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, even though it's not so comfortable, I've spoken a lot with Alan Dershowitz. And Alan Dershowitz is a very special Jew. Alan Dershowitz is a fighter for Israel, a fighter for the Jewish people, a fighter for the human rights. His books about Israel have been very popular and have been one of the only major defenses in contemporary culture for Israel. But I want to say something else. And that's the tragedy. And that's, I'm saying it to this school. Alan Dershowitz has grandchildren who are not Jewish. And it's sad for him because he, one of the greatest mouthpieces and spokesmen for the Jewish people. And part of his family, there's no continuity. And there's a reason for it. I'm not talking about that particular family. I'm talking to all of us in our own families. And that is as follows. If the only argument to my children why they should marry Jews and continue the legacy is because Hitler hated us and anti-Semites hate us, kids say, you know what? I'm done. Leave me alone. I'm in America. I can marry whoever I want. I can get any job I want. You know what? I'm going to get rid of this burden. I don't need this burden. I don't want to be fighting Hitler for the rest of my life. I want to relax. I want a good life. That's our challenge today. It used to be 40, 50 years ago, you told a kid, don't perpetuate Hitler's legacy. It shook him to the core. Today, it doesn't work with everybody. It's like, leave me alone. It's too much pressure. What we need to give our children is a real good Jewish education from a positive perspective. The gift of being a Jew, the gift of Judaism. You want a good relationship? You want love? You want romance? You want peace of mind? You want to understand who you are? You want to have a deeper awareness to be able to deal with your traumas, be able to deal with your anxiety, and we all have them. Judaism is a path for an enlightened life, for an expansive life, for a meaningful life, for a life infused with inspiration, with depth, with creativity. The priorities that Judaism creates in our lives, the way Judaism encourages and helps us cultivate better marriages, better sexual intimacy, relationships with our children. How do you raise children today with technology? How do you raise teenagers today? What's the balance between protectiveness and autonomy? What's the balance between love and discipline? These are big questions. How do we relate to homosexuality, transgender, suicide, drugs, depression? Is there still a mitzvah to respect your parents? Or today, did the 10 Commandments shift? Respect your children, don't respect your parents. These are fundamental questions. When do we grow up? Do we grow up at 13 or even at 50? We're not growing up. So Judaism is a blueprint for life that allows each and every one of us, whether you consider yourself religious, secular, reform, conservative, orthodox, right-wing, left-wing, liberal, progressive, very progressive, very conservative. It's a blueprint to be able to suck the marrow out of life. That's why today Jewish education is not just nice, it's critical, it's vital. Makes sense, Stephen?
Thank you. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I know there are other questions. The only thing I'd add is, I think one of Dershowitz's points was that, irrespective of whether or not there's anti-Semitism in the world, I think, as you said, there needs to be a reason to be Jewish, right? His point, one of his points was, when anti-Semitism is on the wane and people are not focused on it, why do Jews feel the need to be bound together? And you made the other point, of course, that's true as well, that, if it's too difficult to be targeted by anti-Semitism, Jews are going to walk away from it. So you see the sort of two converse sort of problems. One, there's too much anti-Semitism, I can't face it, versus there's no anti-Semitism. What does it mean to be Jewish? And I think the answer to all of it, as you said, is education and showing why Judaism is important enough to stand up for. I know there are other questions, but thank you for that. Thank you. So I guess, should we read these out, or I said I can kind of read these.
Read.
Okay, so this is from Esther. What is a good way to respond to the following question asked by a 9-year-old? why is it that no one stopped the Germans from killing 6 million Jews?
Yeah.
Hard question.
Oh, it's a very hard question.
Yeah.
And I think the answer to the question is a very, very honest one, a very true question. And that is, there's two types of people, and they both made a terrible mistake. One group of people didn't believe it's really going to happen, or even it's really happening. There were people, good people, but they said Hitler is a crazy person. He's a meshugana. Give him what he wants and he'll relax. It's not really going to become so bad. It's the 20th century. There's airplanes, there's cars, there's movies, there's television. It's a different world. Yes, before YouTube, but so much progress. There's science. There's running water in our homes. There's functional bathrooms. We can fly. We can get into a car. Amazing. This is not going to happen. He's not going to build gas chambers and send children into gas chambers. It's the era of enlightenment. We got rid of religion. Nietzsche said God was dead. It's the era of egalitarianism, of fraternity. French Revolution introduced individualism, the age of science, of reason. So a lot of people simply didn't believe it's possible. They didn't see it coming. They didn't take it so seriously. They didn't put up a fight. Then it was too late. Also remember, Hitler and the Germans were very sly. The way he tested the waters and the way he increased the pressure was very, very strategic. And then there was another group of people, very large group of people. And that is sadly, the nature of many people is to be apathetic in the face of cruelty because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to disturb their peace. They don't want to stretch out their necks for people that they don't know, especially for Jews. That was a huge, huge group of people. And that was basically what happened. And the lessons from this is that we have to be able to defend ourselves. We have to be able to stick together. That's why it's so important for Israel to be strong and for Israel to be safe. And it's important for us to be united. And it's important for us to be powerful, spiritually, morally, and militarily.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks. Here's another one.
And it's good for our 9-year-olds to know. And I'll say this. The Torah warns the Jews 36 times to love refugees. V'ahavta mesager. And the Torah always says the same thing. Because you were foreigners and refugees in Egypt. Because the Torah knows when I suffered something, I may do that to other people. I may do to others what was done to me. So Torah says, take your tragedies and turn them into moral opportunities. It's good for our 9-year-olds to know that we live in a world where many people will not stand up for the weak and the vulnerable. And our job as Jews is to learn from what we have been through and to stand up for the weak and the vulnerable and to inspire others to do that as well.
Right, absolutely. Another question, do we have partners to help us fight, or are we always on our own? And I know, during the Holocaust, there were of course, those righteous non-Jews who saved Jews. And I guess, what do you see as the trends today? Do you see that help, or
Great question.
Not? Yeah.
The answer is, sadly, it turns out that very often we have been alone. On the other hand, in every generation, including in ours, there are those special people, Gentiles, who care. And we must mobilize them. We need to join forces with them, because this is not a fight that we could or we should do alone. And the reason is, first of all, we're not many, but also because it's not only our problem. As I told you, anti-Semitic societies begin with Jews. They don't end with Jews. This is everybody's problem. So we want to reach out to them. We want to thank them. We want to mobilize them. And there are always those people. There are always, we wish there were more, but we can always find them, and we have to accentuate it and talk about it and ignite the fire under their bellies and under our own bellies.
Right. Here's another question. How would you respond to an open anti-Semitic remark in high school or college in front of other people? And then connected to that, how do you stay a Jew in America in everyday life? It's just one of those situations where, you know, and any of us at any time could find us in a difficult situation. Do you sort of cower? Do you stand up to it? And how do you determine that? How do you make your decision?
Right. Excellent. So obviously you have to know the circumstances. In other words, if you're in a difficult or dangerous situation, you know, the first obligation is to protect yourself. But if there is an opportunity to speak out, we have an obligation to speak out. If I'm in a position where I can open my mouth and speak truth to power and speak out with love and with clarity about hatred and bigotry and the dangers of anti-Semitism, I have to do it, not only for the sake of the anti-Semite, but for everybody who's there, for all the youth who are watching, and they're all impressionable. Let them go home and think about what happened. I want to be a mouthpiece and an ambassador of love and truth and light and hope and morality and decisive clarity. I don't want to duck. I don't want to shirk my responsibilities. The first story we know about the first Jewish leader, Moses, what's the first story? He goes out, he grew up in a palace, in aristocracy, as an Egyptian. His stepmother was the daughter of the Pharaoh. He goes out one day. First story about Moses. And he sees an Egyptian man beating a Jew to death. He had a choice. He could have said, oy vey. He could have thought to himself, yeah, this is the reality here in Egypt. What does he do? He confronts the injustice. He kills the Egyptian, he buries him, and he saves the Jew. Because of that, he had to run away from Egypt to save his life. And that's how Moses became Moses. What this teaches us is, do not be silent in the face of abuse, violence, and injustice. Obviously, if you have to protect yourself, you have to protect yourself. And if you're in an impossible situation, you want to be reasonable and flexible and logical. You don't want to put yourself in danger. But if I have the opportunity to speak truth, I must never hold it back. I'm responsible to call out evil. I'm responsible to protest. I am responsible to speak truth. And that ultimately inspires people. We become inspired and empowered when we see that. You ask about staying a Jew in American everyday life. I think there's only one way, and that is study and observance. If we're only going to be Jews at heart, it's going to be something that's not concrete. Our children won't see it, and I don't think it will have the impact that you want it to have. The way to stay Jewish in American everyday life is I wake up in the morning and I know that I'm a Jew. I wash my hands. I wrap the tefillin if I am a male. I pray if I'm a male or a female. I give charity. I study Torah. I eat kosher. I celebrate Shabbat and Jewish holidays. I give my children a Jewish education to one degree or another. We celebrate Jewish mitzvahs, commandments, holidays. There's a kiddush. I make kiddush on Shabbos. There's an atmosphere of Judaism in the house on a daily basis. That's the only way I can remain Jewish. If I'm just a nice Jew at heart and on Yom Kippur I go to synagogue, it's nice. It's nice to have a Seder, a Passover, and go Yom Kippur to the synagogue, but that's not going to be able to create a reality for my children and my family.
Right. Absolutely. I have two more questions on this topic, and I don't know about our time. We also received some other unrelated topics, questions on other Jewish topics, but two on this topic. This is personal to me. So this question came from someone else, but I have children this age also. How would you recommend addressing or dealing with anti-Semitism with young children, 5 or 6 years old? The strategy I've used, and I don't know if this is right, is sort of to shield them. They haven't heard the term anti-Semitism. They don't know what the Holocaust is. That's, maybe that's a cowardly move on my part. It's inevitable that they're going to learn it, of course, in school when they're, I don't know what age, 9, 10, and I'm shielding them from that. Is that what you'd recommend, or would you recommend sort of, introducing them to the harsh realities of the world early on?
It depends where you live and what they're seeing. In other words, if you're living in a more safe place with a powerful Jewish community and they're not exposed to Jew hatred, I don't think there is a mitzvah to shatter their innocence. I don't see the benefit of it.
Okay.
If obviously they're dealing with it, then we need to give them the safety and the security and the resilience so that they don't internalize it as a trauma. Because when children go through difficult things, we can't always eliminate that. But if they have caretakers who are emotionally attuned to their needs, and who are sensitive to their dilemmas and pain, it creates all the difference between a trauma, capital T, that can often undermine their emotional well-being, and something that's painful, but they have the resilience to deal with.
Right. Absolutely.
Never allow them to deal with this in a lonely fashion, with a sense of isolation and suspicion and hopelessness and the feeling that I'm alone. Because ultimately that's what trauma is. Trauma is the isolation. It's not what happened to me, but it's what's still happening to me as a result of what happened to me, because I had nobody to speak to. I had nobody to embrace me. I had nobody who made me feel that they understood what I was going through.
Right, and it's just similar, as we were talking, I think a similar question came up. It's related, and I assume the answer might be the same, but at what age should we, should families tell stories related to the Holocaust or communist persecution? I assume the answer is kind of similar depending on circumstances.
There's also two ways to tell stories. The younger children you want to give them the positive experience. You could talk to them about the Jews who in the communist era stood up for their Judaism and did amazing things to hold the Jewish torch alive. Again, our primary Jewish identity we want should be positive. It should be celebratory. We want to celebrate Judaism. So at a very young age, we want to give them the stories that accentuate the resilience, the faith, the love, the quality of life that Jews had and that Judaism can give us. You always want to be able to focus on the positive more than on the negative. As they grow up, of course, at some point, you're going to tell them the story. But generally, if it's not necessary, the focus at young age should be the feeling of pride and proudness that we want these children to have from their grandparents, from their faith, from their heritage. But for this, we have to educate ourselves. If we think that Judaism is just a heavy burden and it's all about those who hate us, we're not going to be able to bequeath that positivity to our kids.
Right. Absolutely. Here was a question that came in. There are so many today, what we'd call self-hating Jews, right? I mean, for lack of a better phrase. You think of someone like a Bernie Sanders or someone like that. It was just pictured with Jeremy Corbyn. Is there these people, to me at least, are like kind of the most infuriating, right? Because they're going to be used by anti-Semites. Oh, look, the Jew said this, right? This Jewish person said it's okay to say all this and do all these things. Is there a strategy for dealing with them, for re-education of that particular group of people? I mean, they are, again, like kind of the most infuriating people that are possible. That was a question that came
in. You know what? It's extremely, extremely disturbing. It's very painful when we see wealthy Jews, popular Jews who donate money, time, resources for causes that are sometimes, let's put it this way, not benign to the Jewish people, not benign to Israel, and sometimes the exact opposite. And instead of being a light unto the nations use them as pawns to increase darkness in the world. That's not what a Jew is supposed to be, a source of darkness. It's supposed to be a source of light. It's very, very painful. But let me tell you the best approach. The best approach to this is not to get outraged and enraged and angry and just burn up against these people and sit around our Shabbat table and curse the living daylights out of them, because that's not going to be effective. I like very much the approach of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I heard this from Alan Dershowitz. There was a Chabad institution that invited Jesse Helms, Senator Jesse Helms, to speak. Jesse Helms was against Israel. Alan Dershowitz wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The chutzpah that Chabad is inviting a Gentile who's against Israel. And the Rebbe wrote back to Dershowitz, let's bring him closer and show him what Israel is, show him what the Jewish people. And that's what happened. Yeah. Jesse Helms became one of the greatest advocates in the Senate for Israel. So I think the best approach is to seize every opportunity we have to be able to help these Jews understand what it means to be a Jew and what it means to love a Jew and what it means to be proud of being a Jew. We could get angry, which is fine, but that's not going to be effective. Instead, let's be proactive. All these Jews are suffering from ignorance and more ignorance and more ignorance. So let's use our money and resources to educate Jews, to educate a new generation of Jewish children, to understand what matters, and to fight for truth and justice and love, and not to surrender and be exploited by bigots and anti-Semites who use Jews to show that they're not anti-Semites. They used to have a concept called the Pope's Jews. You know about the Pope's Jews? The Pope had to have his Jews. So they have the anti-Semite Jews. You know, look, he's Jewish and he's on our side. So we need to educate them.
Thank you for that. Here was another question on topic. So I'll just read this one. It's a very specific circumstance. So I'll just read this. My 8th graders in public school were doing a play based on the diary of Anne Frank. On the first 2 days of this module, several kids started saying negative things about Jews. A few kids stood up for Jews and my daughter. But after 2 days, my daughter went to the counselor. She was torn because she felt like they should be able to have their opinions, but she didn't like the uncomfortable situation. Was that the right way to handle that, or what would you do in that situation?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a painful question. What's really paining me is how the counselor responded. Right, that she felt that they should be able to have their opinion. Because he or she is Jewish. I'm fine with somebody having an opinion, right, about somebody's behavior or a country's policies. I have no problem with that. But what if these people, if these kids would speak about the fact that all Black people are contaminated because they're Black, and all Spanish people are made in the image of the devil because they're Spanish, and all Muslims are evil and should be eliminated, what would her response be? Say, oh, you're entitled to your opinion? What type of chutzpah is this? we also say he's entitled to his opinion? Or we say, wow, you really need help. Let me hold your hand and help you. Let me show you how your hatred is going to destroy your own life, not only somebody else's life. Let me open you up to the fact that every human being is sacred, that every life is valuable. Jew and Gentile, Spanish and black and white and Caucasian. That we don't judge a person based on the color of their skin or their race. And to be able to say despicable things about Jews just because they're Jews? What type of chutzpah is this? She should be fired. She should be disciplined. She should be educated. Maybe she didn't realize. I'll judge her in positive ways. I like to judge people meritoriously, but she should be called out for such a behavior. You don't want to make people uncomfortable? Somebody comes and smacks your child, you don't call them out because you don't want to make people uncomfortable? Sorry, I don't buy it.
Okay.
She did not live up to her responsibility. She failed her responsibility, and she should be called out. She needs to apologize, and she needs to learn to be able to fix her mistakes and be educated, because she failed her responsibilities as the counselor. Sorry, that's the truth.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Am I being too blunt?
No.
Telling you the truth.
Agree.
I am sick and tired. I am sick and tired of Jews accepting the blame and being harassed and oppressed and subjugated, and then saying everyone is entitled to their opinions. Everybody's entitled to their opinions, to their own opinion. Not everyone is entitled to their own facts. And when somebody develops an opinion of hatred, those opinions are dangerous. And we must educate them and enlighten them. Because if not, we create a dangerous world. There's a reason that every public school today has a metal detector. It wasn't around. These metal detectors weren't around 50, 60 years ago. There was not one case of shooting in a school. Something is very wrong when we stop teaching children right from wrong, and we stop teaching children values, and we stop teaching children that what's important in education more than in the information is to be a mensch, to be kind, to be respectful, and to know that you're held accountable. And that what matters most is that you're a good person and you're compassionate to other people. I'm going to tell you something, and I want everybody to hear this because I know Jewish education is very expensive and tuition is very high. There was a mother who called me. She wanted to take her child out of Jewish schools and put her child in public schools. She was very disappointed with the Jewish schools. And I told her, listen, I'm not naive. I know about the flaws in Jewish schools, and I speak about them a lot. Everybody knows. If you watch my clips, you know I speak about them a lot. Sometimes I get in trouble too. But I want to tell you one thing. You can go to every Jewish day school in this country. Hasidic, Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservadox, conservative, Litvish, yeshivish, right-wing, left-wing, centrist Orthodox, Chabad, Bubbe, Vishnitz, Kloisenberg, Bells, Tzanz, Puppe, whatever you want, every school. They have very different philosophies. None of them have metal detectors. None of them. From Westchester to Lakewood, from Teaneck to Englewood, from Crown Heights to Borough Park to Williamsburg to Flatbush to Canarsie, none of them have metal detectors. Why not? Because every one of those children, from the milk of his or her mother, is inculcated with the conviction that you never take the life of another person. There are autistic children there. There are Down syndrome children there. There are children with special needs. There are children with personality disorders. There are children with medications. There are children with mental challenges. There's no metal detector. So I told her, before you take your kids out of a Jewish school, think twice and think hard. These schools are not perfect, but in the public school system, you can't get in without a metal detector. Because sadly, every few weeks we hear of another shooting and another shooting and another shooting from children. Something has become so rotten in our society that children are capable of murdering other children. There is a reason for it. And it's because all of our silence, not realizing that the most crucial thing in education is teaching your children values, teaching your children character, teaching your children right from wrong, and teaching your children that what God cares most is about how you treat other people and other children, including Jews.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's probably it's 9 o'clock. I think that probably is about time. We really appreciate this is an excellent speech, and really appreciate your feedback, the questions everybody submitted, and your answers, Rabbi. Thank you. This was very informative, enlightening, and a lot of lessons learned. I mean, I think there's, on each point as you were talking, there's so many connections to our just everyday lives. You think about parenting and colleges and just different situations that all of us have been in. It's a discussion that could go on for weeks, months. This better than all of us, but I think what you did in this hour was amazing. So I really appreciate it on behalf of all of us.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the dear parents of Mazal Day School. Thank you to the leadership of the school. Thank you for everyone joining us here. Thank you for your courage, for your participation. And may all of us together be able to hold hands and say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. Let us be strong. Let us be strong. Let us strengthen each other. Let it strengthen our homes, filling our homes with light, with love, with Jewish values, with Torah, with mitzvahs, and with inner Jewish pride. Getting rid of our fear. We can acknowledge our fear. We can't let our fear dictate us. As Mrs. Roosevelt said, the only thing that we have to fear is fear. Thank you, my dear friends. Good night.
Thank you.